and the Board of Selectmen for having me here tonight, and for your willingness to consider this online through the virtual meetings. As Lauren and Rob mentioned, I work for MAPC, the Regional Planning Agency for Greater Boston, and I have been working with the Housing Committee, the Housing Steering Committee for well over a year, and just many thanks to them, and really to everyone who's participated in this process. Tonight, we're here to ask the Planning Board and the Board of Selectmen to consider adopting the plan so that it can be submitted to DHCD. And I just want to start by saying, adoption isn't a commitment to housing production at any given rate or implementing any one strategy. It really just activates the HPP as a planning and policy guide, and kind of is a pathway to achieving the goals that the town has identified. To activate and be able to act on them when the moment's right. So just a refresher on why you are all considering an HPP tonight. As you all are aware, an HPP can help the town maintain 10% of its units on the state's subsidized housing inventory, or the SHI. We'll be talking a lot about that tonight, and safe harbor from 40B development. The HPP is in and of itself, it's a plan to reach safe harbor, and it's also a step towards temporary safe harbor in and of itself through HPP certification, which again, we'll get into a little bit later. But aside from 40B, it also has some really important benefits. It guides the type of housing that's built and where it's built in town. The town has worked really hard to identify. We think that these housing types are appropriate for Cohasset, and here's where we think they might work. And most importantly, it helps Cohasset meet its housing need, which is kind of the crux of everything. The process, let me see, I'm juggling all my screens here. I just want to say a few words about the process. The Housing Committee has had a real strong leadership role in both developing this plan, and also, honestly, before I even came into Cohasset, they had really laid the foundation for a lot of this work. They're a strong committee, and I truly appreciate their insight and their thoughtful involvement throughout. I also want to acknowledge that the town adopted a master plan less than a year ago, and a lot of the work in this HPP builds on the work that was done as part of the master plan, which I think many people here were involved with. And finally, I just want to acknowledge that it relies on input from members of the public who have come to a variety of different engagement events that we've held, both formal traditional forums and more informal tabling at the rec fair, at the farmers market, places where residents just happen to be. So that's been a real fun process. Just a quick overview of the elements that are required to be in an HPP, required by state regulation. The first is a housing needs assessment, which is a data-driven analysis of who lives in town, what sort of housing is in town, and what needs are expected. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that tonight, because I think a lot of folks are familiar with that content already, but I just will remind you the two very high-level takeaways are that Cohasset residents are generally pretty well off, but it's not universal. 20% of households in Cohasset are low income. So I'd ask you to keep those 20% of households in mind as we continue talking about housing need. And also just the housing in town is expensive, and there's limited options for folks who aren't looking for large single family homes. Whether it's young families starting out, people who are looking for, who are low-income folks who are looking for deed-restricted housing, or seniors looking to downsize. And so that's been a big focus of, where we've headed. The second piece is affordable housing goals, which are, goals to guide how we're going to create options to meet Cohasset's need. And the third piece, which is where we'll be spending most of the time tonight, is implementation strategies. And that includes both policy strategies and also identifying sites that might potentially work for housing. So first now we're going to get right into the housing goals. There are a couple, because Cohasset has done such robust planning, there's a couple of different buckets of goals that I'm going to talk about tonight. The first is just a reminder of the goals from the recently adopted master plan. These were based on the data analysis that was done as part of the master plan, engagement through forums, and input from the master plan committee. Oops, I skipped ahead. Here we go. All right, master plan goals. The first is to diversify Cohasset's housing stock to provide more options that, in terms of affordability, size, tenure, similar, building off of what I just mentioned about, that most of the housing in town is large single family. The second goal was to increase the supply of deed restricted affordable housing. That's kind of capital A to build off of what affordable housing, to build off of what Rob said, for specifically for low income households. And the third is to support seniors. Cohasset senior population is expected to grow in the coming years. And so we want the town to be prepared for that. The second bucket of goals is what, the housing committee really, we spent a lot of time really kind of thoughtfully identifying how to address where the need was and who the town wants to be serving. And so these are based on the committee's understanding of the town's need, as well as the additional engagement and input that we've been holding throughout the process. So again, similar to the master plan goal, senior housing to address the needs of Cohasset's aging population. And I want to specify that that doesn't just mean age restricted senior living housing. It also means options for folks who are looking to downsize, but still want to stay in town and remain in Cohasset's strong community. The second one is workforce housing, or housing that's affordable to moderate income households. We spent a lot of time over the year talking about the fact that, can folks who work in Cohasset at the circus, or in the DPW folks, could they afford to live in town? And the committee felt that that should be an option. The third is veterans housing. Folks were very passionate about ensuring that that people who have served our country through military service have an option in town. And finally, again, similar to the master plan goal, capital A affordable housing, to just continue to address the needs of low income residents. And the third bucket of goals that is part of the HPP are the production goals. I'm going to go through this a little bit briefly, but I expect there'll be a lot of questions on this, so we can come back and flesh this out in a little more detail if folks do have questions. The first goal is to maintain Cohasset's safe harbor status with 10% of its units on the state's subsidized housing inventory. Cohasset does have safe harbor right now, but safe harbor is based on the most recent census, which is currently this 2010 census. Cohasset has seen a lot of housing production since then, and so as Rob mentioned, we expect that Cohasset will fall below that 10% when the 2020 census numbers are released. Now, the good news, and I just learned this a day or two ago, is that the 2020 census housing unit numbers are not likely to come out before the end of 2021 because of a couple of the things that are going on now nationally. The numbers are delayed. The census numbers get released in buckets. So population numbers are released first and housing numbers usually come after that. So although I can't say for certain exactly when they're going to be released, we're probably looking at late 2021, early 2022. So that buys the time a little bit of time to really, be working towards this goal.
Excuse me, Alexis.
Yeah.
Relative to that, are you saying that the affordable housing count that we have is going to be through the end of 2021,
yeah,
possibly?
Yes.
And it's related to the census as well. Can you give us some idea of how those numbers are going to work in conjunction?
Yeah, absolutely. So so right now, Cohasset has 307 units on the state's subsidized housing inventory. As of the 2010 census, it had just under 3,000 housing units. So that's over 10%, you're good. And until the census releases new housing numbers, that 3,000 total housing units as the denominator is what the state is concerned with. So even though the census is ongoing right now and will be for the year 2020, until the Census Bureau releases those new numbers, the only numbers that the state is going to use are the 2010 census numbers. But we know that Cohasset has produced a fair amount of housing since 2010. And so the number of housing units in town as of 2017 was 3,311 units. So that's another 300 or 400 units in the past 10 years. And based on that number, where the town is now, the percentage of units on the subsidized housing inventory will fall below 10%. We can't say exactly by how short it's going to be, because we won't know that number for sure until the 2020 census numbers do come out. Based on where the town was in 2017, that number looks like it's going to be about 25 units. Considering, you know, the growth hasn't simply stopped since our most recent data point, my guess unofficially is that you're probably looking at a shortfall of between 30 and 35 units, which is really doable. You're so close. And so that's the number that you'll need to get to permanent safe harbor. And again, we won't know that number, we won't know that exact number until the census comes out. While you are working towards permanent safe harbor, and again, this is all within the context of the town has safe harbor until the new census numbers are released, and that won't happen until the end of 2021 at the earliest. So until that happens, the town has safe harbor. If that 25 to 35 units is not attainable by the time the new census numbers are released, there is a pathway to get temporary safe harbor. That's this whole slew of text at the bottom of the screen here. If the town produces 14, or if the town gets 14 subsidized SHI eligible units within 1 calendar year, then then you can certify the HPP, and that gets 1 year of temporary safe harbor. If the town produces 28 units within 1 calendar year, then that gets 2 years of safe harbor. The 2 years of safe harbor gets a little bit tricky because it's going to be right around the number needed to get permanent safe harbor, but I just wanted to let you know that that is an option in case the number is, the census number is higher than we're expecting. That was a whole lot of really technical jargon. Is that clear? I know this is really important to folks, so I want to make sure that people understand the path to safe harbor.
Yes, thank you.
Great. I'll continue, but we can also come back to that afterwards if there are more questions. So I'll talk briefly about the locations, which is a required part of an HPP. The town DHCD or the State Department of Housing and Community Development requires towns to identify potential locations for housing, which makes sense. You know, policies only get you so far if you don't have any place to build it. And this is, you know, identifying areas that the town thinks are appropriate for housing. So the first thing we did was a quantitative analysis, which we ran a GIS analysis based on like 20 indicators just totally quantitative, where might housing be suitable in town. Some of the factors that we used that kind of indicated where high opportunity sites are, you know, is the housing near amenities? Is it on vacant land or larger parcels that might make it easier to develop? You know, is it not near sensitive habitats or wetlands, which that's kind of why that orange, which is less suitable, that you see is in a lot of areas along the coast where sea level rise might become an issue, or in wetland areas. This is totally quantitative, and it's just to be used as a tool for the town. But after that, or building on that, we had a discussion about some specific sites. And I want to preface this by saying that anything that happens on the sites is up to the property owners, and any development that will happen will still be reviewed by the town according to the zoning laws and any other applicable regulations. This is just identifying opportunities. These recommendations were a mix of specific sites, which were based, which the housing committee and town staff identified as parcels that they thought made a lot of sense, and also some general locations. These were based on input from engagement that we had about possible locations, previous plan policies, some of which came from the master plan, and also the locations analysis. And so those areas are the areas the northern part of 3A and the village center and the harbor. And in addition, there's for specific sites which we can get into if folks have questions on those. I don't want to, there's a lot in here, so I'm going to just give a really high level overview of everything, and then we can come back and spend time where it's needed.
That's fine.
Oh, sorry.
Any questions? Okay, keep going. Yeah,
all right.
Thanks.
Great. the last piece of the HPP is strategies. The committee felt pretty strongly that, some HPPs have like 20 strategies that they just kind of like throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. The committee felt really strongly that they wanted to have strategies that really mean something for what, in terms of both what Cohasset can reasonably accomplish in 5 years and, what are going to really address Cohasset's goals. So for that reason, we have 7 priority strategies. In addition to these, there's another dozen kind of secondary strategies in the HPP, which if the town meets all of these strategies within the next 5 years and they want to keep going, they can start looking at those. But these are the areas that the committee really identified as being, where the focus should land. The first is continuing to seek nonprofit partnerships. The Housing Committee has already fostered partnerships with some great organizations, great affordable housing developers. Having these relationships will be great because when an opportunity arises, like for example, the parcel on Jerusalem Road, the organizations can help the town understand what's feasible so that they can craft realistic RFPs or expectations. The second part of this recommendation is to not just relationship building, but also the town, to ensure that this results in housing, affordable housing production, the town should proactively use its resources so that these relationships can result in built housing, whether that's dispersal of land, for example, the Jerusalem Road parcel, pre-development funding, or due diligence support or assistance with permitting. It's, let's really leverage these relationships that exist to make sure that the town gets good housing that it wants, that good affordable housing that will serve low-income families. The second is Community Preservation Act funds. I'm going to not spend much time on this because the town has already been going gung-ho on this with the re-impaneling of the housing, the Affordable Housing Trust and the CPA allocation in September. The town's already most of the way there on this one. The recommendation will also be to just continue reallocating on an annual basis the Community Preservation Act funds that are earmarked for housing so that the Affordable Housing Trust is in a position to continue to act as need arises. The third strategy is for cottage style housing. This gets to what we've spoken about earlier in terms of, there's a lot of large housing in Cohasset, but not necessarily options for folks who might want to downsize but stay in town. So this recommendation deals with a couple of policies and regulations that can look at how can Cohasset amend its bylaw to consider in very specific locations where it's appropriate, namely perhaps two of the larger parcels that were included in the recommended sites. Small little cottage housing with shared open space that would be very consistent with Cohasset's character, but would also provide an option for folks who are maybe younger families starting out, or who are interested in.
Alexis, excuse me. Thank you. That's great. Just wondering, what do you think the size range is for cottage style housing?
That could be anything.
I mean, 800 square feet to 2,200 square feet, or?
Yeah, that's really up to the town. I am working on a cottage bylaw with another town, and that it's 800 to 1,800, I believe.
Got it.
So
that
small.
makes sense. Yep.
But that is entirely up to the town, and I imagine the discussion of housing sizes would be one of the first things that the town would look at in terms of feasibility and preliminary studies.
Thank you.
Yeah. So again, this is just addressing that need. This is not necessarily capital A affordable housing, although I assume it would be subject to the town's inclusionary requirement, but this is just looking to meet a gap in the need of, a gap in the supply of housing in town. This fourth strategy is to essentially to use state resources to accomplish these goals. So both in terms of the cottage housing that we just discussed and some other additional studies in the that are coming, there are a lot of planning grants that are available that will enable the town to, Clark just said, to study, all right, what's the right size for this? What's the right density for this? What is, let's get into the details and figure out what we need to make this happen. So this is just identifying resources. Another piece of this is, to continue monitoring Cohasset's eligibility for state capital funding, namely housing choice. So again, just making sure that their town is taking advantage of all the resources that exist out there so that these strategies can happen. The fifth is denser housing types. This kind of goes along with the cottage housing types in terms of just identifying ways that, smaller housing types that are really consistent with the town's character and also consistent with the identified need in town, that are just more naturally affordable and more attractive for young professionals and families starting out, downsizing seniors. And Cohasset is already participating in a study with 4 other South Shore towns to look at what housing types might be appropriate for the South Shore, smaller housing types that make sense for these local communities. And so this recommendation will be to continue participating in that and then see what action items come out of that. The sixth is aging at home. As several of the goals identified, there's a desire to support seniors and enable them to continue to age. This one deals largely with the Cohasset Cares program and expanding its capacity to serve Cohasset seniors as the aging population continues to grow, and also to really promote and leverage state resources that exist. There's quite a few of them that are designed to enable older residents to stay in their home, to retrofit their homes, and so to just, again, leveraging these state resources to make sure that these folks are getting what they need in their homes. And finally, mixed use on Route 3A. As you all, I'm sure know the issue, you all are aware, the town is studying sewer capacity with a few other adjacent towns along the northern part of Route 3A. And this would be to not let the land use, this recommendation is to make sure that the land use is considered equally alongside that. So perform a land use study to make sure that the land use regulations are aligned with the town vision for what could happen on that corridor, particularly focus on potentially mixed use on that corridor, including some housing. So that was kind of like a very very fast run through of the strategies. I'm happy to talk about any more of them in detail, but before I do, I just want to lastly go over what will happen after, if the boards decide to adopt, what would happen next. The boards would make a motion to adopt, and that would be, I didn't mention before, but there is a slight discrepancy between the town's records for what's on the subsidized housing inventory and DHCD's. I know Lauren is actively working on fixing that discrepancy and getting to the bottom of that discrepancy. But in the meanwhile, we are recommending that the safest path is to just use the most conservative number, so that no matter what, the town is in good shape. So the adoption would be to recommend adoption pending the resolution of these numbers, since these numbers we'd use the town's numbers and not the state's numbers in the current text of the HPP that you saw. So we would just amending those numbers to be consistent with the state's numbers. After that, the MAPC will submit the HPP to DHCD. DHCD, the state agency, has 30 days to do a completeness review, and after that, 90 days to actually approve the HPP. So assuming that, if the plan is adopted tonight and we submit in mid-June, that we're looking at, at the latest a mid-October approval of the HPP. The HPP is approved for a 5-year term. And anytime during that 5 years, the town can apply for certification of the HPP, which, getting back to those production numbers, would be what the town would do if it produces the 0.5% increase or 1% increase in additional units on the subsidized housing inventory. The timing gets a little, those units must be approved within a calendar year. So if the town is interested in pursuing certification, you're probably looking at 2021 to be a good year to be looking for units for certification. So that is the very big picture of what might happen next. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Just a quick question on that, yeah. Alexis. So in the meter, so to speak, the 1-year meter starts in October when DHCD does their approval.
It depends. It's a calendar year. So if Cohasset has a project that has 14 SHI eligible units, or 14 units that become eligible for the SHI in November of 2020, then that's the year, and that's great. but it is within a calendar year. So if the town has, say, 7 units at the end of 2020, then the town might consider asking that, might hold the approvals until January, so that everything that counts in that year, 2021 year could count towards certification.
Those are important details. So
Yes.
thank you.
Just to jump off of that, Diane Kennedy, one of the selectmen, what makes a unit count? Is it a certificate of occupancy, or is it?
That is such a good question. It depends. The short answer is it depends. If the project is getting a comprehensive permit, it is when the comprehensive permit is issued. If the project is not getting a comp permit, it's when the building permit is issued. And the certification is when, it's when that eligibility happens. So assuming you'd be looking at a comp permit, it's the day that the town approves that comp permit.
Great, thank you.
And I've had a lot of back and forth with DHCD about this, just because y'all are so close. And I've shared all that information with Lauren, and we have more detailed information than what's been shown here that I can share if that would be helpful.
And a couple of examples would be the Avalon project. Those 220 units counted once once they got approval, and then with the LIP project at the Stop and Shop Plaza, those 20 units won't count because it's a LIP until there's a C of O.
Okay.
Just a couple of examples.
So can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Does the Commonwealth give any consideration for available siting of properties for buildings? So, I looked at the map, and there's probably a third of it is open space that's not buildable. There's probably another 15 or 20% that's protected wetlands. Does the Commonwealth give any consideration for that?
The short answer is no. I mean, the Commonwealth obviously does not want anyone to be building on wetlands or protected open space. And I don't want to. I don't work for DHCD. I can't speak for them. But typically, the most towns are able to I shouldn't say most. Any town should be able to accommodate 10% of units on its SHI. So that the state doesn't really take that into consideration. The 10% requirement is across the board.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? I think the next slide is questions. So
Yes.
anyone? Yeah, Rob?
I'm good.
Okay. Well then, Alexis, I don't know if you have a summary or if Lauren wants to jump in.
So I'll just say thank you very much. It was an excellent presentation, Alexis. We appreciate all of your work. And we don't have any questions in the Q&A. If there's anyone in the public, now would be your time to ask.
It looks like Amy has a quick question.
Could we, after this presentation, which was very thorough and very thoughtful, is it possible for you to direct us to examples of places like Cohasset that face the same kind of problem that we have, which is a scarcity of buildable land, so that we can think through what other places have actually figured out as solutions to this issue?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Cohasset is certainly not the only town that faces this challenge. But I will say the 4 sites that were identified are sites that are promising. So I think there's potentially a real path there within the town's priorities.
Certainly in the past, the towns sort of used the lack of sewer capacity as a control on development. But, if there is increased sewer capacity, that will allow more sites to get developed.
Can I just mention something?
Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah. So this is the summary, and I think Alexis put together quite a comprehensive book of information, and in it, we did discuss, possible, places in addition to the ones that were mentioned here. But like when and looking in the detail, we also talk about existing sites that just aren't deeded. So, for example, we have plenty of situations where, for all intents and purposes, they're affordable housing, but it's not deeded, so it doesn't count on the housing stock. So we could do things like with the Historical Society or some other groups to get those deeded, not have to develop anything, and get it into the housing stock. So we did look at that, and I do think there's more than enough. I mean, we spent a tremendous amount of time looking at other places and what they did, and we're confident that there is more than enough opportunity to meet the needs that to get to the 10%. We're not talking about hundreds of units. We're talking about a couple dozen at most.
Right. I know Marshfield had their buy down program where you could take a two-family house, buy down a deed restriction, and you don't have to develop anything. You've already got the units that are there.
Yeah.
So there's lots of great ways to, not crowd up neighborhoods and just change the ownership mechanism to get more housing on the SHI.
I just want to thank the Affordable Housing Steering Committee and Rob and Paul's leadership and Lauren and Alexis, because, we have town meeting next Tuesday. Is it next Tuesday? Yes, I think it is. Or no, it's a week after. It's two more. Phew. But we have two pretty significant initiatives that will be before town meeting. One is the transfer of the 808 Jerusalem Road property, which was taken in tax title, into the Affordable Housing Trust, which is fabulous and a huge leap forward. And we're also transferring $200,000 of CPC funding, CPA funding, into the Affordable Housing Trust to give us that ability to move on any opportunities and ultimately issue some RFPs, particularly for the 808. So thank you. Big steps forward.
Thank you, Diane. Yes, Alexis, that was an excellent job. And Rob, I know you've been keeping your foot on the gas with the Affordable Housing Committee for years.
For a very slow moving car, but yes.
That's the nature of affordable housing. But I echo the commendation of the housing committee for just keeping this moving and on task, and actually in coming up with some real substantive results.
Yep.
Great. So is there any discussion or questions?
I have a question. Are we going to be presenting the other two PowerPoints? The actual plan that was draft?
There's another PowerPoint?
I don't know if those are going to be presented tonight or not, or is this the only one?
Well, this is just a summary of. We won't be presenting in detail the plan. The plans have been distributed to the boards in advance for review. But this is supposed to be the summary presentation.
Okay, I just yeah, because the other drafts that are up on the planning board's webpage have a lot of the details of all of the work that our committees have done for such a long time. We've been around for, I think, 5 years now. So we've learned a lot from not just gathering the information that's in the report, but there's a lot of things that aren't in the report that we've learned a lot about as well. And I think that with the selectmen here in this meeting, I think, one thing that we've seen through this process is that we have a lot of great committees in town that are stakeholders in how things are processed and built and approved in the town. I think I'd like to suggest to the select persons that maybe a goal for the town manager for 2021 would be to try and put a mechanism in place to where these stakeholders are kind of brought in at the beginning of some of these projects, these departments and committees, and a mechanism that would keep them up to date, maybe quarterly, or how often we think something should go. I know that the property at Stop and Shop is had a lot of travel with trying to get their process through and get everything done, and they're still trying to reach that goal of getting approved and getting everything deeded so that we could count that. So with the additional projects that we've identified, I think it would be great if we can kind of learn from some of these processes that seem to be cumbersome, and identify some of the strengths of those processes and the weaknesses, and see how we can better process some of these as we move forward. We've got that 808 Jerusalem. That's a small project which we're anxious to get underway. But then we've also identified other larger projects that are similar in scope to the Stop and Shop project. So I'd like to see if those projects go a little smoother. And I think it would if the folks that have the stakeholders in that process are kind of brought in at the beginning to say, here's what the scope of the project is, here's the goal that we're trying to achieve. How do we get there without coming back a year later or 2 years later to say, oh, we've got this problem, how are we going to solve it? So that's one thing I'd like to see happen.
Paul, I think that's a great idea, to have stakeholders meeting ahead of some of these affordable housing initiatives. Certainly, we're stuck with whatever the requirements of zoning is, whether it's jurisdictional to the Zoning Board of Appeals or the Planning Board, that we have to deal with, because zoning takes a 2/3 vote of town meeting, and we take those rules and regulations certainly seriously. But if there's ways to speed up communication and ways to have an understanding of expectations up front, I think a stakeholders meeting on projects sounds like a great concept.
Yeah, I think as we all know, everyone has expectations, and I think understanding from the stakeholders what the requirements are, what are the laws, and what are the process are. You could temper those expectations to where everyone's kind of on the same level playing field for what they can achieve.
That sounds great. Thanks, Paul. Does anyone else have any other specific? Yeah, Diane?
No, I just wanted to confirm that, I hear what Paul's saying, and I think that municipal structure and affordable housing, they're both slow boil processes, but I agree. And master plan implementation committee has been established, and affordable housing is one aspect of that. And I think that we're going to get smoother about making sure the stakeholders are in touch with each other early on. And I think that, Stop and Shop Plaza is one example of where that, there are all these different kind of silos speaking, and that just can't happen. That's just not good governance.
Well, we added something new this year that the town didn't have before, and that's the money man. That's the trust. So we've added a critical element to all of this, which is the housing trust. So I think that that's going to be a key part of success moving forward. A lot of residents, they're not subject matter experts at any of this stuff, and a lot of people say, geez, how come it went so easy in the town over there? Why doesn't it go easy in our town over here? So I think that, like I said, I think once we kind of get the town manager involved in putting some mechanism in place so that we can all, understand what the expectations are and what the process is, then I think we'll be a lot smoother.
Sounds great. Thanks, Paul. So unless there's other items to discuss, I think the planning board can entertain a motion for adoption. Lauren, did you have any comments?
Jack Creighton has his hand up.
Oh, Jack, I can't see you.
Yeah.
So go
Oh,
ahead,
okay.
Jack.
Well, you may be fortunate. Anyway,
There he
Paula, okay. The point about the planning is very good. It's hard to believe that it was 5 years ago. I was one of the original members. And what has happened is we learned a lot. We learned we needed the housing trust. We learned how to move this forward. So I think this housing committee has done an excellent job, and they're to be commended. And Mr. Kearse, great idea. I think we should have the town manager or some governing authority make sure we get this. But credit goes to the committee for figuring this out. It's very difficult, and I think we're moving forward, and we'll solve this problem. So congratulations.
Good point, Jack. And I think Alexis and the committee have done an excellent job.
Yes, they
So
have.
in terms of adoption, what I'd recommend is that we have two. This is a joint committee a joint meeting of two committees. I think it probably makes sense to take separate votes. One vote of the planning board, and then another vote of the Board of Selectmen. Is there a motion from one of the planning board members for adoption of the housing production plan?
Excuse me, Clark, could you take the questions things down, and then we can go back into our gallery view so we can all see each other during the vote?
Yeah, that'd be great.
I'll make a motion. Should I go ahead and make a motion?
Go ahead, Amy, make a motion.
I make a motion that the planning board adopt the recommendations of the housing production plan.
Could I ask?
Is there, oh, great. Is there a second?
Paul Schubert has a question.
Could I ask that the
Yeah, go.
requirement added from the current inventory be discussed at the state, the Commonwealth level, and at the town level to be in agreement?
Okay, so we have a motion, and Amy, do you want to rephrase your motion to accommodate Paul Schubert's request for coordination of the housing count, the SHI, and the SHI?
Just for clarity, excuse me, I think it was mentioned that we should adopt this pending the DC.
I think I might have lost you guys there for a minute.
Okay, Eric. Go ahead, Diane.
No, I think Alexis was saying that the motion would be adoption pending the synchronicity of the DHCD numbers and the town numbers.
Okay.
So it's just a clarification on the motion.
All right, Amy, do you want to make that motion? You can say so moved.
So moved.
Thank you. Do I have a second from the planning board? A second from the planning board, Eric?
Second.
I'm sorry, I think I lost you guys. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Eric. We
Yeah, I
got a
lost-
I
second.
second it.
We got a second from Paul. Is there any discussion among the planning board members?
No.
Okay. Then all in favor. I'm going to take
Aye.
a roll call. Clark Brewer says aye. Paul Grady,
Aye.
Eric Potter,
Aye.
Amy Glassmeyer.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you. Kevin, if you
Yes, Paul, do you want to go ahead and make the motion on our end?
I'd like to make a motion that the Board of Selectmen approve the Cohasset Housing Production Plan with the understanding of an agreement at the Commonwealth and town level for the inventory of current housing.
Second.
Oh,
Second.
could I interrupt? I'm so sorry to interrupt. The state requires the boards adopt, not approve. I just want to be clear about the language. I apologize for the interruption.
Thank you, Alexis.
Not a problem. Go ahead,
I
Paul.
will withdraw my motion. I'll have a second
Yeah.
motion that you said approve,
No,
Adopt.
adopt.
that we adopt the Cohasset Housing Production Plan with the understanding of a consideration of a final inventory of town numbers for affordable housing that is in agreement with the state and Commonwealth.
Second,
See Alexis Nota, is there a second?
second.
Is there a second? Call for roll call. Diane?
Diane Kennedy, aye.
Paul Schubert, aye.
Carrie?
Harry Thompson, aye.
Jack?
Jack Creighton, aye.
Kevin McCarthy, aye. Tracy, that's unanimous from the Board of Selectmen.
Good work.
And,
Congratulations.
excellent work. Thank you very much, all of you. This is a lot of work has gone into
Very
this.
exciting.
It's very exciting, and it gives a good planned way for us to go ahead and meet essential housing and goals going forward. So I know you've done a lot of work, so thank you very much.
We've got some dancing.
I just wanted to say that I'd like to thank the 27 participants who are on this Zoom call. That's quite a number of people. I know that I called people that are really vested in the town for housing, and I hope those are some of the folks that joined the meeting. So thank you to all those folks and those who are watching on TV as well.
And that presentation was fantastic, Alexis. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Again, it was a group effort, and I can't emphasize how critical the Housing Committee was in getting this to where it is. So thank you all.
Great.
Thanks.
Well, I
Alex.
certainly think the Housing Committee has shown that they're a major part of the future of Cohasset, and I thank all you members very, very much for the work you've done.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we're 4 minutes ahead of. We're 13 minutes behind schedule for our hazard mitigation plan. So I'd like to move on. We have Ann Herbst from MAPC, and I'd like Lauren, can you do an introduction for this part of our meeting and introduce Ann in a more complete way?
Certainly. First, before we move on, I just again want to thank everyone from the Affordable Housing Steering Committee. I want to thank Alexis Smith from IPC for an excellent presentation, and everyone for your efforts and interest in continuing to move the ball on affordable housing. So thank you. Next, moving on from one of our MAPC representatives to the next, we have Ann Herbst here from MAPC. Ann has been working on the update to our hazard mitigation plan. The hazard mitigation plan addresses natural disasters, events, hurricanes, different forces of nature, things of that matter. So again, very important from our emergency preparedness planning perspective. And with that, I will turn it over to Ann, who will go over the details of the update from our last.
All right, thank you. I'm going to try sharing my screen. Is that working? Are you hearing it, me and seeing it?
We can see you and hear you.
You sound great. Thank you.
Just trying to see. Oh, there we go. So thank you very much for this opportunity to present to both boards. I'm the second half of the MAPC double feature. And this plan has not been going for 5 years, but it has taken about a year, and I will give a quite brief report. I want to be respectful of your time. And for some folks on the planning board, a bit of this will be review because they hosted an earlier meeting on this project. But tonight we're presenting the full final draft of the updated plan, and it's going to be available for public comment for 2 weeks. And after that, we'll submit it to MEMA and to FEMA for review. MAPC's role has been to provide technical planning assistance to revise the plan. I do want to clarify one thing. On this plan, you are actually not being asked to take any vote tonight. FEMA has a very specific procedure, and that is to do this last meeting with, they prefer it before the key boards like Selectmen and Planning Board. It then goes for review, and FEMA will send it back to the Board of Selectmen for final adoption after they've done their full review. So tonight is just to make sure that you know what it is, and that when it comes back to you for adoption, you will have had an opportunity to review it.
Great. Thank you, Ann.
Okay. So the Federal Disaster Mitigation Act was passed in the year 2000, and it actually set a goal for every municipality to have a hazard mitigation plan. However, it's a goal, it's not a requirement, but FEMA does have a pretty good carrot to participate, which is that having this plan in place makes town eligible for grants, for hazard mitigation grants. And Cohasset has in fact received grants in the past for work done on the Jerusalem Road culvert, and also for several for sewer manhole improvements. So hazard mitigation, as Lauren said, focuses on natural weather-driven occurrences, not terrorism, not chemical spills, for example. Flooding is the most common in Cohasset and in most towns, but we look at tornadoes, which are uncommon, but they happen. We look at winter storms and ice storms, which are very common, earthquakes and landslides, which are very low probability, but not zero probability. Things like drought are unusual, but we had a very significant one in 2016. So it's also not an emergency response plan. The focus is really on the preventative side of things. The town has other plans that address emergency response and other types of hazards. What's new in this plan is that we incorporated future climate impacts, and taking into account that increases in sea level, precipitation, and heat will really change the dynamics of our natural hazards. FEMA's interest or impetus for these plans was looking around the country and basically seeing this cycle that you see here, where we'd have a disaster, we'd rebuild pretty much in the same way, have the same disaster, and need to rebuild again. And obviously these kinds of events are really costly to the town, and they're costly to residents. So the idea of these plans is to really interrupt that cycle and try to address things ahead of time. So MAPC, as you know, is Cohasset's regional planning agency. We provide technical assistance on plans for many communities. This is actually Cohasset's third plan, its second update at this point. We assisted on the first two plans. And we work with a local team, and that team, I want to acknowledge, was led by Lauren Lind, which was really terrific. We had a great group, and the reality is that it's really the town staff and their expertise and local knowledge that's key to the plan. And in that plan, we channel information into a format that's required by FEMA. We populate it by data that's customized to the town. Two public meetings are part of the process. This is the second one. And as I said, we'll make the draft available for review. It's hefty, so that we want to give people a couple of weeks to take a look at it if they'd like to. So really the main effort is to identify the hazards and specifically map them to the town. So we start with with higher level data in the state plan, and then work with the local teams to plug in local information. It all goes into mapping. They're digitized on GIS layers, which can be available to the town for use in other kind of planning projects. So in each plan, we identify local hazard areas, and you can see that areas were identified for flooding, for fire, and for icing. The flooding locations are for Cohasset are both inland and coastal. Most, but actually not all, are in or adjacent to flood zones. The team also identified areas that might be subject to forest fire. I don't want to suggest, I think the fire chief indicated that, true damaging forest fires have actually not been common in town, but they do happen. And then finally identified a place where icing and blowing snow has been an issue. So we also look at critical facilities and map those. We look at them for sort of a range of reasons. So we look at disaster response sites, other municipal facilities that could need services, other kinds of facilities that might need assistance, for example, nursing homes, critical infrastructure such as dams or pump stations or communications. And so we overlay all this information with the flooding and other hazard areas we've mapped to try and identify and quantify and analyze the vulnerabilities. So this is a list of mitigation measures that existed before the first plan was adopted. I don't put them up here because anybody needs to really absorb them fully. It's really more to say that hazard mitigation planning was occurring in the town well before these plans existed. It takes many forms, whether it's planning or regulations or public education, land protection, and a lot of it really is kind of baked into the work that town departments do on a regular basis. So these plans are 5-year plans. So what we were doing was reviewing the last 5-year plan and developing a new 5-year plan. So one of the things we look at is, well, what kind of progress was made in the last 5 years on the projects that were identified. So you can see here, and I imagine you will recognize some of these projects, but certainly many efforts were made and completed to improve resiliency. And then this is really the heart of the plan. These are, you know, a good sampling of the kinds of priorities that are going into this next 5-year plan. So, and again, it includes kind of a range of activities from infrastructure to regulatory strategies to equipment purchases. Some of the continuing priorities include GIS upgrades and addressing ongoing infrastructure and equipment needs. New priorities include bylaw improvements, drainage upgrades, equipment purchases, and strategies to address power outages, coastal flooding, and brush fires. I think a lot of what we talked about, and we've talked about in the context of climate change as well, is the challenges that the town has experienced with power outages due to storm events and also to coastal flooding. And in that vein, one thing to note in this plan is that the team added a new goal, which was consideration of future climate impacts. This plan really builds on the planning that the town did in 2018 when it completed a large community workshop looking at climate issues. And I know directly out of that plan, the town received a grant looking at some of the coastal issues. So Cohasset really has been very much very active in both doing plans and doing implementation and being successful in grant applications. So that's all really good news. So as I said, the plan is on the town website. We'll take comments until June 17th. We then submit it to MEMA for review. That again goes to FEMA for review. Once they review it, they issue what they call an approval pending adoption, which means they've approved the content. And that's when it comes back to, that shouldn't say town council, to the Board of Selectmen. So we're not asking for action tonight. Tonight, this really is for information. And when it comes back from FEMA, there'll be a request for your adoption. And then after it is a 5-year plan, after it's reviewed, approved, we definitely recommend ongoing review and integrating the plan into other, recommendations and policies that you have that are ongoing. And obviously taking advantage of the funding that this makes the town eligible for. So once again, the plan's on the town website. The link is probably hard to read, but if you go to the Planning Board Office webpage and look for the Cohasset Hazard Mitigation Plan 2020 update, that's where you will find it. And comments can come to me, Ann Herbst at MAPC, and I would be very happy to take any questions.
Any questions from the planning board members?
Any questions from the Board of Selectmen members? This is going to be coming back to you. Paul Schubert?
So there's one kind of interesting thing here. In the report, it mentions there's no injuries from the thunderstorms in the Norfolk County, and I know of 2 lightning strikes that I saw. So there were a couple of injuries, which were.
Oh, that's interesting to know. That duly, I stand corrected. The data comes from a NOAA database. That they're the ones who collect the information. But thank you.
Yeah.
Any other comments from the Board of Selectmen? Any questions from the audience? I'm not seeing any, Clark.
Okay, Lauren, I don't know if you have any closeout comments for both boards for Ann's presentation. Did we lose Lauren?
Sure, yes. I just want to say again, thank you oh, I'm sorry. Do we have a question?
Nope. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much, Anne. Wonderful presentation. Thank you for your work. And again, just to state again what Anne said, the plan is available for viewing. It's under the Planning Board Office website on the Town of Cohasset website, and you'll see on the main page there under Planning Board Office a list of different plans there, and the hazard mitigation plan can be found. So if you have any questions or comments, you can also feel free to email them directly to me. My email is llind@cohassetma.org, and I would be happy to forward them to Anne. So if there's no further questions, then I think we're set with Paul.
Paul Schubert.
Should we just make a motion just to say send this to FEMA for review and discussion?
It's not necessary from a FEMA perspective.
Okay.
Thank you, though.
Paul Grady?
But this Board of Selectmen will have a chance to, in this case, it's approve,
It's actually the same term is required to adopt.
to adopt.
But
once-
the reason in particular to make sure that the Board of Selectmen get a chance to see it and that we put it on the website is that the MEMA and FEMA review process is fairly extensive. It will take several months. So once they approve it, it would be unfortunate if at that point the town wanted to make changes to the plan. So we do hope people will take advantage of this 2-week period to let us know if there's anything that need any kind of edits that are requested.
Great. So it may be this fall that you're asking the Board of Selectmen to adopt.
Correct. And at that point, it's meant to be very much an administrative activity. I wouldn't expect any further presentation.
Got it.
I
Thank
think
So,
Paul Grady. I think Paul Grady's first, then Jack Creighton.
Go
Paul?
ahead, Paul.
Thank you very much. Were those flood areas that you listed, are those the only ones in Cohasset that you have, that you listed
Well,
on the page?
they were the ones that were singled out as sort of. I mean, Cohasset has flood zones. So what town staff was really identifying was specific areas where they have identified and experienced ongoing difficulties. So it's really meant to augment our knowledge of the flood zone. We also mapped sea level rise locations.
There are a few more flood zones that I could think of. That's why I'm asking.
Well, certainly, I'd be happy to take those from you. We can do that offline if you like. But if you that certainly is part of the plan, is to have a pretty good identification of areas that flood. So if you're aware of areas that are outside of the flood zone and not ones that are identified.
Yeah, I saw you listed the post office. Behind that, since the railroad tracks have gone in, the Smith Place Cushing area, the hillside, they've had some historically good floods there, I'd have to say.
Okay, I will look at what at that location. It may be that we did identify it and I didn't capture it in terms of how I described it well enough, or maybe we didn't identify it. So I'll check on that.
Thank you so much.
Jack Creighton?
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think one of the takeaways is this is an opportunity for people to do what Paul Grady just did, which is say local knowledge. There are some issues, because it seems to me, and correct me if this isn't correct, that this is the opportunity for the people in the community to look at this and bring suggestions, because after you go through this, there's really no opportunity. Is that correct? Is that a fair assessment?
It's correct for the plan. It certainly doesn't mean the town can't address where there are issues, but this really is the couple of weeks of opportunity to make sure that the plan is just as complete as it can be.
Right. So in other words, you really do want people to take advantage of this opportunity to assist you in any things that perhaps you don't know yet.
I'd be, yes,
Good.
very much want comments and happy to take them.
Thank you.
Amy Glassmeyer, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I just want to comment that I think in the case of Pleasant Street, that it may be a landform issue and not a flooding issue from surface water coming up out of the ocean or the harbor region. But does this plan take into account land feature flooding that's the result of the topography? It adds to an existing problem, but it might actually be a unique problem by itself.
So each place that is identified has a description, and I can't speak to this one off the top of my head, so it may or may not, I mean, hopefully it describes accurately what the issue is as best as it is known, but each place that has been identified as a specific flooding area should have, a bit of explanation of what the issue is.
But would somebody have identified a hanging aquifer on the top of a hill that would actually fill up periodically during heavy rain and then also release its water, adding to what is at the foot of the rise? It's not a conventional land feature. It's not something you would necessarily expect to find, but it is possible that that's what happens there.
Yes, and that is the kind of thing that's relevant. I mean, that is the idea about, you know, going from the FEMA maps, which sort of are a very generalized, you know, here's where it may flood, to kind of specific. I mean, often we'll have sort of a paragraph that says something, you know, there's a, you know, the road dips here and it floods here for this reason when this happens. So those kinds of things are exactly relevant.
Thank you.
Okay, great. I think this concludes our two presentations by the MAPC, and thank you so much. And it concludes our joint meeting.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ann.
Thank you, Ann.
The planning board has some additional business, and Board of Selectmen are welcome to stay for our discussions. But Diane, did you have a question?
No, I just wanted to, we actually have another meeting, so we're all checking out, right, Kevin, and going
Yes,
to another link. So I'll let you explain it. I just want to make sure no one dropped off.
Right. Yes, so to the Board of Selectmen meeting, we're still in session. We're gonna go, you know, to a separate meeting, so we don't have two meetings on top of each other. So we can all leave the meeting, and you should have gotten the link a few hours ago. Does everybody have the link to go to the next session?
Yes.
I assume everybody does if they haven't said anything. Okay,
Yep.
so that being the case, this is 7:46. Why don't we reconvene at the next link? How about at 7:50? We can do it right now in 4 minutes, okay?
Great.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you,
Yeah,
everybody.
Thank
Thanks,
everybody
planning
who
board.
presented.
Thanks,
Thank
planning
everybody
board.
on the-
Thank you.
Everybody on the planning board, yeah. Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
See you all soon, BOS. Yep.
Great job, everyone.
Yes, bye.
So next item on our agenda, we are only 16 minutes behind schedule, is a discussion about the pending Harbor Village Business Overlay District Special Permit and Site Plan Approval application for 124. Everybody knows we've gotten materials for this, and we're going to have our first session on the 17th of June. Lauren, do you want to set up the discussion on this with our council, Karis North?
Certainly. So thank you, Clark. We, as you just mentioned, we have a pending application that will open the public hearing on June 17th. This is our final meeting before we open that public hearing. So the intent for this evening will be to go through an overview of the process that will ensue. Our special counsel, Karis North, has prepared for us information about what this process will entail. I can share that on the screen in a moment. We can walk through that. And then in addition, at the last meeting that we had, we spoke about a tentative schedule that would allow us to break down different topics by different meeting dates. And it was requested that I revisit that and consolidate it a bit. So I do have a revised schedule for you to look at, and I would seek your approval. As we know, the schedule, it's scheduled subject to change depending on circumstances that may arise. Can't certainly predict the future, but I would like to get this set as best we can so that we can all be best prepared, that the public can be prepared to, if they don't want to participate in every meeting, that they can know which topics are going to be addressed on which evening, and even for the development team, so that they can make sure that their different team consultants and whomever will be presenting on certain nights are ready, so that we have a more predictability to this scheduling process. Clark, are you still there?
There were two attachments that Lauren sent with the agenda this afternoon. One is the schedule, and the other is basically a list of procedures that Karis is going to review with us. Does everyone have? Oh, you're going to put that up on our screen.
Yes, I can. I'll share the screen now. So I'll turn it over to our special counsel, Karis. Thank you very much for being here tonight and for preparing this for us. And I'll get that on the screen in a moment.
Good evening, everybody. Clark, you're on mute if you're trying to speak.
Hi, Karis. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. I hope you're all well, safe, doing well. Okay. So Lauren asked me just to walk you through the process for your review of this application because it has several pieces to it, and there are pieces that are several pieces in front of you all, the planning board, and then there are several other pieces that are outside of your purview that I wanted to go through. I'm just going to touch on the sort of 30,000 foot view right now. And not get too deep into the details. As you'll see, this application will be reviewed by a peer reviewer who will provide some feedback on the specific pieces. But like I said, I just want to walk you through the process. So
with the board members, feel free to raise your hand and ask Karis any questions as she's going through this outline.
yes, absolutely. And even, jump in. I'm just in case I don't see your hand. If I don't see your hand and I see Amy's already got her hand up, I will, just speak out if I don't recognize you. Amy, do you have a question before I get started?
The starting question that there'll only be one peer reviewer. So one person is going to be covering the entire project.
I believe so. I think that peer reviewer has not yet been selected. It's out for bid. Is that correct, Jen and Lauren?
Yes, that's correct. Jen has been working with our procurement department to get the RFQ out for a peer reviewer. We don't have a selection yet, but Jen can speak to that more a bit later. It may be an individual, it may be a team. It really depends on the responses that we get from the RFQ. So to be determined.
Thank you.
Right, it depends. Yeah, it will depend on how the bids come in, as Lauren said. So, all right. So this is an application under the brand new Harbor Village Business Overlay District, and as it says, it's an overlay over the downtown village district zoning, and they could choose either the underlying zoning or the overlay. They've obviously chosen the overlay for this project. There are two pieces required in the overlay. First of all, they have to do a site plan review, which is the site plan process that is required under your general site plan review under your zoning bylaw in 12.6 that has some specific site plan standards that you're going to have to look at and evaluate as part of your process. In addition to the general site plan standards under the Cohasset zoning bylaw, this Harbor District Village Business Overlay, or excuse me, Harbor Village Business Overlay has its own site plan standards under 22.4B. So you're going to have to make sure you check off both review and you consider both review as you're doing your application and your hearings. The application is supposed to go to other boards and commissions for review. And I believe Lauren is working on that process as well. And so they're given essentially 30 days to review the application and to submit their comments to the planning board to consider. And that means you're not allowed to act. And by act, that means come to a final decision until 35 days after they've gotten that application. So they need that opportunity to give you their input onto this plan. The hearing has to be open within 30 days after receipt of the application. That's going to happen next week. And then the decision has to be issued within 21 days after the close of the hearing. Now, I'm put a little bit of a star on the decision date because there's also a special permit process here as well. So in the next part of the section, you have to do a special permit process under 12.4 of the Cohasset zoning bylaw, and there are specific standards that you all are familiar with that you have to review under 12.4A. A special permit also requires the application to go to other boards and commissions for review. So they're reviewing the entire application. And again, they have to have the opportunity to give input to the planning board, and the planning board can't act until at least 35 days have passed after that application has been sent to the other boards. In addition to the general special permit standards, there are specific standards under 22.6A that have to be considered in this application. And you should all actually have a copy of that. I know Lauren sent you the overlay district zoning. So you've got to look at the general standards and then the specific standards for this zoning district overlay, which includes the things in 22.6A, some additional restrictions on the first floor dwelling under 22.6B, parking standards consistent with your general parking standards, and then some specific exceptions in 22.7, some very specific dimensional requirements in 22.8, and then 16.11, which is the senior standards, do not apply to this district. I did note that the applicant also talked about inclusionary zoning, which I hadn't mentioned, and they're meeting the Cohasset inclusionary zoning requirements as well. In this case, in a special permit, public hearing has to be open within 65 days after receipt of the application, and the decision has to be issued within 90 days after the close of the hearing. Now, this is a combined application for both the site plan and the special permit. So at the end of the day, really the special permit timeframes, which are longer, will apply to the combined application. That also means that the special permit voting quantum of a 4/5 vote to issue the permit here will also apply. So again, you go through this joint process. It's really just to conserve your resources and not have to do it twice. And then you have to meet that special permit quantum of vote. There'll be a checklist. Staff and the peer reviewer will review the application for completeness. The peer reviewer will go through all the calculations and ensure that they're consistent with the bylaw requirements. You can see in the application, they've done a summary in the cover letter to Clark about, what they've done and why it meets the applications. But obviously you're going to have to check all those numbers and all those calculations and go through that application. I think that, with respect to sort of different issues here, it makes sense to go through a process as Lauren has laid out of breaking out different issues, because you may spend an entire meeting just on parking. You may spend an entire meeting, on the combination of retail and the dwellings. So, I think there's a lot to look at. There's obviously a lot of detail here. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but this is how the process really flows together. The other things that are going to be happening outside of your jurisdiction with respect to this permit is there's a special permit application required under the floodplain and watershed protection district that will be pending before the Zoning Board of Appeals. I believe that application has been filed, but those hearings aren't scheduled to start until July. And then there'll also be a Concom review, separate review for an order of conditions, and there's also Chapter 91 jurisdictional area on this project as well. So that's a whole separate piece. So the applicant will be required to get, at the end of the day, before they can build this project, from the planning board, a special permit, approved site plan, a special permit under floodplain and watershed protection district from the ZBA, and an order of conditions from the Conservation Commission, and a Chapter 91 license from DEP that has an order of conditions with it from Concom. So that's the 30,000 foot overview. Are there any questions?
Lauren, will you be making summary comments to us about your recommendations for the reports, or will we be relying solely on the peer review for identifying alignments between the expectations of the special district and the actual project design.
Thank you, Karis. And I think one of our recent meetings, we talked about.
Is that you, Clark?
Yep, Clark, I think, has not a good connection.
That's what I think too.
Hello, I'm back.
Okay. Go ahead, Clark.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
You might turn
So
off.
I heard Amy's question about Lauren nation of the peer reviewer, and I expect that Lauren may have her own specific
Hey, Clark, what if you try shutting off your video so maybe just your audio can get out? I don't know if that'll make a difference.
recommendations for the board
It's like we're trying to guess what he's saying.
in parallel to what the peer review has been.
Well, in the meantime, while Clark is having a hard time communicating, I'm just going to say my observation has been that in some instances, the planning director will make their own recommendation. I'm just asking if that's how we're going to operate.
And whether
Clark.
So
I don't know. Picture.
Clark, you got a bad connection there, and nobody can hear you.
Can anyone hear me now?
Not really.
It's
all right. Eric, why don't you take over the meeting?
Smoke signals.
Oh my gosh!
Well, I
How in
can't.
God's name are we going to do this without?
I can't turn on my video because my video's been turned off by the host.
I turned it off. I was hoping to make your connection better. If Clark, you can call in.
I turned it off myself.
It's better now.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
All right.
Okay.
Okay.
So
No, he's got a tough problem.
So,
Clark, it's still not better.
All right, why don't we mute Clark so we can move on with the meeting?
All right, hold on.
I think Lauren's gonna be.
So anyway, while we're still struggling with Clark, is it possible, Lauren, that you will make individual comments for us so that we see what you see and what you think, and then we will develop our opinion of what the peer reviewer says?
Okay.
As well as
sorry, there's a lot happening right now.
Lauren, can you mute Clark? There you go.
Okay, there we go. All right.
Okay.
Sorry, I was having some difficulty there. I wasn't able to mute Clark, and there was a lot of people at once. Yes, Amy, thank you for your question. I will prepare a staff review, and I will go over application completeness. And I'd be happy to continue to follow up. We will rely on the peer reviewer to do a lot of the in-depth and going through things such as, the engineering designs. That's not my forte, but I will be looking into zoning compliance and be aiding you with my staff reports. Does that answer your question,
Yeah,
Amy?
that's great. I mean, the things that are super technical, I fully believe that the peer reviewer is going to carry the weight there. That's why they're hiring them. But I really like having the planning director guide us, at least to some extent, so that we don't get lost and we don't get sidetracked, so that we can actually meet the deadlines that you have set for us.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. I'm happy to, that's my role here, to keep everybody on track and to make sure that everybody is informed. And again, like I said, there'll be an initial staff report, and given a project of this scale, I can update as necessary and, make sure that we are answering everyone's questions and addressing all of the items of concern. I'm going to, in the meantime, I'm going to call Clark so that we can get him at least on the phone call here.
And Amy, I'll be coordinating with Lauren to the extent that, you all have legal questions. She has legal questions. The peer reviewer has legal questions. I'll be going through all of this application in detail as well. And, making sure it's compliant from a legal perspective as well. So, an additional resource for you all, but obviously she's going to speak on her position, and you all will have to ultimately make your findings. And then I'll help you at the end of the day, depending on what you decide, will help you make sure that the findings that you make and how you express them in a written decision are compliant with the law and consistent with good practices, so that it's a full and complete determination, however you end up coming out at the end of the day.
So that's really great, because I actually want to use this as a learning experience. So I would like to have as much structure as possible that is considered convention, so that it's easy to understand when and under what circumstances you do something. You know, is it a go, no go? How do you go backwards? How do you go forwards? Because it's something that could happen again, particularly as we're talking about putting in sewers and we're talking about 3A. And so I'd like to try to use this as a learning experience.
On these large project applications, it really does make sense to break them out into sort of subject area parts. You'll have sort of the opening, you'll have the opportunity to, again, sort of the big picture perspective for the applicant to explain the project, to see the layout, to see the drawings, and then you'll start breaking it down. And I see how Lauren has done that into specific subject areas, so that you only have to focus on the questions and the issues on those particular areas at that one meeting. And hopefully you get the questions resolved in that meeting, or you have answers that the applicant's going to come back and bring to you at the following meeting. And so, for example, July 8th is site plan and layout and traffic, and you may go through all your questions, and then you may have questions that need to be answered. And perhaps on July 22nd, before you start architecture, you'll finish with the questions on site plan and traffic, and then you'll go into architecture and landscaping. And so that flow works and just helps you break down the issues, so you can stay, so you're not all over the place, and you get your questions answered and your work done.
So for example, Lauren sent us the zoning amendment in the Harbor Village Business Overlay District. And clearly within the language there are items that are in effect worthy of a definition, but don't have a definition attached to them. So for example, vibrant mix of uses, including multifamily residential, that is a category, but it is also a category of variable meaning. And so if we're held to a standard of things like that, should we anticipate that there'll be definitional discussions and it will be clarified that this, when it's used here, this is what it means? So that we're not, you know, going around in circles saying, okay, multifamily is this or that or this or that. I mean, sometimes we end up in an elliptical conversation. It'd be great to avoid it.
Well, so for example, the vibrant use section, that's in the purpose. So that's sort of a general theme that you're going to consider. Are there different uses here? But that's not a standard that you have to consider. That's just sort of general concept behind the purpose of the overlay district. You have to focus on the specific standards that you have to meet and look at, and that the application has to comply with, that are laid out in that zoning bylaw.
So for example, it says available seasonally and serves the public. So will that be defined? Is that a thing that can be defined so that we will conclude the discussion of that knowing exactly what it means by the developer?
Can you just point me to where that language
under
is?
Temporary HVBOD use. It says a programmed activity related, retail food related,
Okay.
water dependent use, that is. And that was something very specific that was put into the plan to make the harbor project something that the public could use, as well as the owner could deploy for the pleasure of the people who live there. And in our discussions, they will choose the definition of available seasonally and serves the public. And then we will respond by saying our understanding of what that means is, or our expectation is, that it will mean 7 months, it will be this. I mean, what level of specificity are we going to be discussing?
So I see the definition. It's, you know, seasonally, I think, has a fairly standard definition. You're going to use sort of reasonable terms, as you know, these terms that are understood in the general world out there, and you're going to use your own expertise and understanding about what seasonally means in Cohasset, right? So seasonally in Cohasset means, you know, Memorial Day to Labor Day, as opposed to seasonally in, you know, or may mean, if you're talking about outdoor stuff, as opposed to seasonally in Australia, which may mean something else. So it's a certain amount of your own expertise and understanding. You guys are the experts on Cohasset and what these things mean in the context of Cohasset.
It's certainly true that all of the standards that are in the zoning bylaw for this overlay, that they're subject to interpretation, and we'll want to ask the applicant how they interpreted and expressed what the goals were, and then have a discussion about it and see if those goals were met in part or in whole.
Okay, so what you're saying then is that they will present something to us, they will define certain things, they will then tell us what their expectation is of what those things will do, and we will evaluate what they say about those things, not about anything else.
Well, I think that the applicant would address how they responded to the goals in the bylaw, even if they're overreaching or general. And then we can help, with the help of our peer reviewer, Lauren, and our own discussion, can decide whether they've been addressed. Lauren, go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. You'll make some judgments. I'm sorry, Lauren, go ahead.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to also add that, you know, from the perspective of Karis will make sure everything is legal. The peer reviewer and I will make sure that everything is technically meeting the standards that are outlined in the bylaws and the different design guidelines and everything that's, you know, pertinent there. But at a certain point, there will be decisions that need to be based off the planning board's judgment on, you know, adequacy of certain aspects of the plan. You know, does it technically meet a requirement? Maybe yes, but you know, if it's not up to what the planning board feels is appropriate for, you know, whatever aspect of the plan it may be, that's where the planning board will deliberate. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, and the reason I'm asking this question with the level of specificity I'm asking is I'm trying to, in a sense, cordon off extraneous conversation that might be great to have, but takes a lot of time and is not going to go anywhere, versus things where it's a subjective situation. There's an expectation by the design of the harbor plan itself, and whether or not the developer has met that expectation, that's what we discuss.
Yeah, and each criteria is subject to evaluation and discussion. You know, basically where they're presenting how they think they've complied with the requirements or the general goal, and then in part or in whole. And where we think they've met them in part, those are the areas where we'd have a great discussion. If they've met them, we think, in whole, then we can move on.
Thank you.
We will have counsel, Karis, we will have you throughout the hearing process.
Yes, for the most part. I have a couple of conflicts on the first two nights, but I'll tell Lauren we'll figure that out.
Okay, so with larger projects like this one, in general, you know, we've had counsel throughout the hearing process, making sure that anything that might lead to a problem with voting or conflicts, so that as we go, we get a little bit of coaching to make sure that if we come up with a decision, that it's going to be enforceable, and not a great rule a great need, I think, that the planning board has. As we've talked, make sure that we not only have a quorum, we have an election coming up after our first hearing, which means there's going to be a new member. I don't think Brian Fraser is coming back. So that's something that we're going to have to make certain that we have a full voting members for every hearing, or I think it's going to make sense to postpone meetings that come up if we can't. So we're all going to have to watch that schedule very carefully.
Yeah, that's something that you absolutely are going to need to track in detail because you can only miss one. You can miss one meeting, but that's it. And then
Right.
you can't vote.
And then
so,
we have a procedure for making up for the information. Correct. And something that needs to be signed as an acknowledgement. And that keeps us so that we have eligible voting members. And this is important for a project like this to make sure that we have the minimum requirements.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I think it might be worth a discussion with your board members, looking at the dates and figuring out which 5 of you are able to make that commitment, at least, this week or this next week for those hearing dates, and then deciding who that's going to be.
Let's see. So the election is the end of June, right? So whoever becomes the new planning board member would have already missed the first meeting.
That's correct. The election is June 27th.
Right, and if someone has to get appointed, then that would be appointed by the selectmen. That would also take place at some point after the election, and it might not be possible to get that in place by the July 8th meeting. So I guess I'd say, again, we're going to have to be really careful. If everybody could look at those dates, can we look at them right now?
We can.
If everybody knows that there's an issue related to any of these dates that are on the table right now, that's June 17th, July 8th, July 22nd,
yeah,
August 22nd. Oh, thanks.
So again, I just want to clarify, just to highlight, this is tentative. This is subject to change based on if something comes up. But Clark, you're breaking up again.
Can I ask a question, Lauren?
Sure.
It has nothing to do with it has something to do with the meeting moving forward, because obviously this sounds like a disaster with Zoom. Is there a way, or I know the town halls aren't allowing meetings to go on, but what if the planning board members all were to meet in a spot and and then zoomed in from there collectively? Is that something that's an option?
I don't have an answer to that right at this moment. That's something I can definitely talk to, because that is one of the largest challenges we've had with virtual meetings, is that, one of the variables that we can't control as town staff is, people's Wi-Fi at their own homes. And,
No, it's not your fault, right? I mean, it's just,
right.
That's just the nature of Zoom, right?
Right. So we can certainly look into that and see. At this point, we are planning to be virtual through, I think.
Yeah, and virtual is fine. Virtual is fine because, we can't have the live meetings maybe in town hall, but we can do virtual and possibly still meet it live as well. And if that's a possibility to do something like that, I think it's something worthwhile entertaining. I mean, we could even, let's say, for instance, at my conference room, my office right in the village, we could zoom in from there or something like that. Or I'm just throwing that out there. It doesn't have to be there, but, it might be something to look into, because this is extremely tiring. And it just really slows down the process.
Right.
Another suggestion might be to see if the town would purchase a hotspot, because I think Clark seems to be the only person that has a hard time with receiving and sending. And I know that we're using hotspots for lots of things. Like we sent home hundreds of hotspots with students going to places around the country because they just didn't have internet access. They didn't have enough bandwidth in order to function in classroom setting.
I think that's a great idea, Amy.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. That's something we can look into. Jen and I will discuss amongst ourselves and with other town staff what we can do to, because it is, I certainly recognize Eric's point. It's it's challenging to begin with, let alone when there's, spotty connection. So
can we return to the agenda and the volume of material we have is highly variable. And I'm just wondering if even with this schedule that we are spread out further than we might need to be. And I'm wondering if when you made this, there obviously you had a reason for having us have a 2-week cycle. So meet, wait 2 weeks, meet, wait 2 weeks. And was there any consideration of us meeting once a week to get this done sooner?
Amy, I didn't consider that. And the reason being is that the planning board, typically, this is just the standing schedule that we have. And in addition, meeting once a week is very tight turnaround time for, for receipt and transmission of application materials. If there's something that comes up at one meeting and then the next meeting it needs to be addressed, it's a really tight turnaround time for anybody to address that. And in addition, there's just, from just speaking personally, I have so many other committees, so.
I just really wanted to know whether or not there was a way we could compress it, but I take whatever you say as the right answer. It's just more I'm trying to figure out, ways that we can move forward as effectively as possible.
Yeah, right, no, and I appreciate that. What I did with this revision is I did try to condense. At first we were going out until, November. I did try to condense it, but again, I am also really trying to be cognizant of, we never know what, there might be one issue that's of particular, discussion point that takes an hour. It's really hard to predict, and it's a big application. It's very detail oriented, and I would rather err on the side of caution and give us adequate time to deliberate on things, also taking into consideration that we will have other items to be addressing in our regular business. So this, again, is just meant to be a tentative schedule, but I just want to try to give some predictability to this.
Amy, in my experience, this is a pretty compressed, oops, sorry. This is a pretty compressed schedule for a big project.
I think Lauren's outline is perfectly appropriate for what we need right now. Now, once we get into these things and we ask the applicant to follow up, they might say, well, we need 3 weeks to change something or whatever it is. And I think that whatever agenda we have, we're gonna be moving things around here. The nature of the beast is,
I'm fine.
We start at the beginning.
I just wanted to know the general ideas about it, but I'm fine. It's not a critique, it's just a question.
Right. Yeah.
I know, but once a week wouldn't work. It's just because the applicant needs time to respond to our comments.
Well, and the applicant and the applicant's attorney and the applicant's engineer and the applicant's architect and your peer reviewer and Lauren and maybe counsel, and then you all need to look at it. So, the amount of eyes and ears and people, doing this more than once a month is actually pretty ambitious. Right. So be prepared for it to stretch out over time.
Right. If I just...
Clark, you're getting robotic again, and I do think Jen had a comment.
Yep.
I just wanted to say that at our last meeting, we talked about the calendar and we were asked to stretch it out because of the summer. So, we responded to that, but we also did discuss that we knew there'll be a lot of unpredictable variables. So the other thing is the summer, the other thing is the responses. And as Clark mentioned, the election and making sure that we get a great response to the peer reviewers. So we have a lot of, honestly, balls in the air to get this done. The good news is that the board already has the documentation well in advance. So that is also very good.
Are there any further comments on this? Now, also, while we have this up, if there's any members that already know that any of these dates do not work, or if in the near future you find out that you have a vacation planned or whatever the situation is, if you could please let me know as soon as possible that you can't make a meeting date in our schedule, that would be very helpful.
Right. So should we move on? Are there any other questions?
One other question, are we going to start at 6:30? Is that going to be our primary time we start?
I think typically we start them at 7, but
I will say we have been starting earlier, and I did schedule this this next public hearing to begin at 6:30. At one of the last meetings we had, I know that Paul Grady suggested a preference for an earlier start time. It's typically harder for him, given his work schedule, to make the later meetings. So I was thinking, if we continue to meet virtually and 6:30 works for people, but we could begin starting at 6:30 as our standing time, if that works for members.
it's all right with me.
Our previous start time had been 7, so.
Okay.
All right, well, if there's no further comment, I mean, does the board, you don't have to make a vote on this, but if you could just give me a green light, does this look acceptable to you? Because I would like to, put this on our website so that, again, like the public has a general idea of what we'll be talking about when we can update this as we need to. But I'd like to just have this set for the foreseeable next couple of meetings, that this is how we'll address things, at least through, July.
Sounds good.
Lauren, have you shared it with the applicant?
I will share it with the applicant. They're here now, they can see this, but I didn't want to send it out in case, something came up in this meeting that we absolutely knew somebody couldn't do July 8th or whatever the cause may be. But if I get the board's general consensus on this evening, then this will be the copy that we put on the website and that we give to the applicant, and make sure that that works for everyone.
I'm trying to
And you
call
have
in.
a comment from George that said it's fine with the applicant. So there you go.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on with additional business.
All right,
Next item on the agenda is 8 James Lane, 2 Pleasant Street. We're going to continue this to the July 8th meeting.
Yes, that is correct. The applicant, I spoke with the applicant, due to everything going on with the pandemic right now, there's been a lot of uncertainty. They requested to continue to July 8th. They're uncertain. They're considering withdrawal, not exactly sure what their next step will be. But at this moment in time, they are requesting a continuation of their hearing. So I would suggest that the board move this to 6:45 p.m. on July 8th.
Okay, well, I think it makes sense to try to continue this, but if they continue us through, they want to be continued through the summer, every meeting. I think we should, consider another approach to this, having them withdraw without prejudice. Can someone make a motion to continue this to July 8th?
So moved.
Eric, that was you. A second?
Second.
Paul, you seconded. All in favor? Clark Brewer says aye. Paul Grady?
Aye.
Amy Glassmeyer?
Amy Glassmeyer says aye.
And Eric Potter?
Aye.
Okay, passes unanimously. And we have on our administration, I don't think we have anything on our administration to deal with. Jen? Is there anything we need to deal with, Lauren? No? Okay,
No,
I'll
I would
entertain
just-
a motion.
Wait, one minute.
And should I get my, like, should I get my Comcast line checked out?
Yes.
I wouldn't
Yes.
pay the bill. Don't pay the bill.
Bad? Is it bad?
I would just
Good luck.
state, if I could, there's been a tolling of deadlines and filing of permits and decisions and things of that nature per the governor's order as in March, but we have 2 pending decisions that need to be signed and filed. That's for 15 Brook Street and 807 Chief Justice Cushing Highway. So what I will be doing is distributing via email copies of those decisions for all of you. And if there's no comments, then we'll figure out a time and place that we can, circulate for signatures. So that's just something to flag for you as an administrative item that I'll be following up with you soon.
Okay, thanks. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Thanks, Paul. Second?
Second.
Thanks, Eric. All in favor? Clark is aye.
Aye.